Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a world where every footstep squishes, creaks, or crunches, not because of fancy sneakers or orthopedic insoles, but thanks to a cobbler's hand, a lot of smelly leather, and the hard-packed medieval dirt beneath your toes. You're not walking through a modern mall or a cozy side street in Paris. No, tonight you trudge through a medieval village, and the first thing you notice is nothing's clean. Not your feet, not the alley, not even the air. Everything smells like a mixture of horse sweat, stale ale, and someone's forgotten chamber pot. And you poor soul, are barefoot, because your last pair of shoes dissolved somewhere between a muddy puddle and a suspiciously warm pile of goose droppings. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle toward a crooked timber building, sagging like it's been holding in a sneeze for 2 centuries. A wooden sign above the lintel swings with the wind. It has no words, just a faded painting of a shoe. Inside, a cobbler is already hammering something, and it sounds suspiciously like he's punishing the leather for existing. Before we meet him, take a glance down. Beneath your feet isn't pavement or tile. It's a moist, squelching blend of soil, hay, and mystery substances. Medieval streets weren't just dirty, they were alive. Literally. Rats dart across your peripheral vision, chickens peck at discarded apple cores, and a stray pig is rooting through a pile of something that may once have been dinner. But this environment, as revolting as it may seem, is what made shoes so vital. Without them, your skin splits, your toes rot, your dignity dissolves. It's no wonder people in the Middle Ages thought going barefoot was a sign of madness, poverty, or penance. You step into the workshop and instantly feel the contrast. It's not clean in here either, but it's warm, smells like wet leather, oil, wood smoke, and sweat. Rows of wooden shoe lasts line the wall, strange foot-shaped blocks used for forming leather. Some look vaguely human, others are disturbingly hoof-like. You see hide stretched over frames, tools with cruel iron teeth, and scraps of cloth dyed with crushed bugs and moldy roots. The cobbler, let's call him Elias, is already at work. His hands are calloused into claws, his nails permanently blackened with dye and dirt. He's not young, and judging by his posture, his spine retired decades ago. Yet his fingers still move with strange grace, as if he's playing some private instrument only he can hear. He's stitching a new pair of turn shoes, the common footwear of medieval folk. Turn shoes are exactly what they sound like, stitched inside out and then flipped right side once complete. It's a fiddly, miserable task involving wet leather, bone needles, and faith in physics. Elias pauses to glance at you. "You're tracking pig slop all over my floor," he mutters. Welcome to customer service, 1374 style. Now, here's something you might not expect. Most medieval shoes weren't made for walking far. Nope, they were thin, unpadded, and barely waterproof. So, what did people do? They doubled up. That's right. Turned shoes inside clunky wooden overshoes called pattens, basically the Crocs of the 14th century, complete with mockery from the fashionable crowd. And if you're wondering what poor folks did when shoes wore out, they kept wearing them until toes poked out like guilty secrets, or they patched them with bits of rope, bark, or old felt, whatever they could find. Shoe ownership was a kind of social status. Some people were literally too poor to walk comfortably. The cobbler doesn't make a fortune either. He barters more than he sells. A pair of shoes might cost a sack of barley, or fixing a hole might earn him a goose leg, if it's not already gnawed. He'll also take jobs from travelers, nuns, even the occasional knight. But mostly he serves the townsfolk, the weaver, the baker, the woman who sells onions by the basket and glares like she invented bitterness. Now, here's your first mainstream fact of the night. Leather came mostly from cows, but not from young, juicy ones. Tanners preferred old beasts, their hides thicker and tougher, ideal for shoes, belts, and moral rigidity. And here's a quirky tidbit. Cobblers often stored their work beneath their beds. Why? Because the warmth from their bodies helped keep the leather pliable overnight. Nothing says romance like waking up next to half-finished footgear. Meanwhile, historians still argue whether most rural cobblers made shoes entirely by hand, or used early forms of standardized parts passed between workshops. Some claim shoemaking was a deeply personal, custom affair. Others suspect there was more assembly line logic going on, especially in cities. Elias, for one, doesn't trust city shoemakers. He calls them lace loop fakers and insists real shoes are built with silence, patience, and a strong ale nearby. By late morning, he's repaired a lady's buckle strap, replaced the sole on a merchant's slipper, and shouted at a rooster that keeps wandering in like it owns the place. You're beginning to see just how intertwined his work is with the rhythm of medieval life. Shoes aren't just protection, they're expression, trade, necessity, and sometimes rebellion. Because what you wear on your feet tells people who you are, or who you'd like to be. And in a world where everything, from your birth to your supper, was fixed by class, something as humble as a shoe could still lift you a little off the ground. But before you get too dreamy about it, Elias holds up a half-finished shoe, soaked in pig's urine to help soften the hide, and waves it under your nose. Still want to be a cobbler? You rise before the sun, not because you're noble or disciplined, but because the town rooster has no concept of personal boundaries. He crows right under your window. Again, you groan, stretch your aching limbs, and roll off the straw mattress that crunches with something you don't want to identify. You're staying with Elias now, the cobbler, And this morning, like every morning, begins with leather. The first chore is a stinking one. In the chilly half-light, you shuffle outside to the curing rack behind the workshop. Hides hang stiff and sour, catching the breeze like grotesque flags. Some are cowhide, but there's goat too, more supple but prone to stretching. You grab a stiff brownish hide and dunk it in a barrel of dark liquid so foul it could be brewed in hell. It's a tanning mix, mostly water, but spiced with oak bark, animal brains, and sometimes even, you guessed it, dog dung. The leather needs to soak just enough to go from rigid to obedient, like a rebellious teen finally deciding they might listen. Elias supervises, sipping from a mug of something steaming and suspiciously thick. He grunts. Not too long. If it oversoftens, it warps. You want it tamed, not ruined. This early morning ritual is less about precision and more about patience. The hides take days to cure properly, so Elias always has some in every stage. One hanging, one soaking, one ready for cutting. The workshop smells like death and discipline, and you're getting used to it. Sort of. Inside, he sharpens his blade on a leather strop. The edge gleams. The tool is nothing fancy, just a curved knife known as a shoemaker's knife, its handle worn smooth by decades of sweaty palms. He uses it to cut soles, slice straps, and occasionally jab at nosy apprentices. Today's job is a pair of standard turn shoes for a merchant's wife. Nothing fancy, just sturdy and presentable. You watch Elias rub the soaked hide with fish oil to keep it supple. Then comes the cutting. Clean, firm movements like slicing through a heavy pancake. He presses the last firmly to the leather, traces around it with charcoal, and slices with the grace of a man who's done this more times than he's spoken to his children. Mainstream historical fact time. Medieval shoemakers didn't use modern shoe sizes. Every pair was fitted by foot. The customer came in, planted their sweaty, unwashed toes on a sheet of parchment or rawhide, and the cobbler traced around it. You could say medieval shoes were bespoke by necessity, not vanity. But let's add a little quirk to your morning. Some cobblers kept tooth-shaped awls, literally little bone or wood tools carved to resemble teeth, believing they stitched luck into the sole that way. No one agrees where this superstition began, but you're not arguing with a man holding a knife and 100 holes to punch. Once the leather pieces are cut, they're soaked again to make stitching easier. You learn to prep the flax thread. First wax it with beeswax, then twist it into 2 strands and loop it through a boar's bristle or blunt iron needle. Elias does this so quickly you blink and it's done. You try once and manage to jab yourself. Twice. You learn the basic stitch, the saddle stitch. 2 needles crossing paths through the same hole from opposite sides. It's tedious, finger-killing work, but it holds better than anything else. No glue here, just pressure, friction, and hours of muttering. Elias doesn't talk much while stitching, but he does hum, some haunting tune that might be a hymn or just something he invented when too sleep-deprived to care. You try humming too and get shushed immediately. Only one voice per shoe, he says, without looking up. Once the upper and sole are stitched, the whole thing gets turned, flipped inside out, carefully but firmly. It's hard, like birthing a shoe. Leather doesn't like to bend that way, and more than one apprentice has split a seam here. But once it's flipped, the stitches vanish to the inside, protecting them from wear and adding to the smooth silhouette. This, Elias mutters, is the art part. Now, here's a debated historical detail. Some scholars argue that certain towns developed regional shoe signatures, slightly upturned toes in York, thicker soles in Bruges, crescent shapes in Milan. Others believe this is modern projection, seeing fashion where medieval people just wanted dry feet. But in this workshop, at least, form does follow function. The shoes you've helped stitch today are built for walking the market, not courting royalty. They'll be delivered wrapped in burlap and maybe exchanged for coin, or a jar of preserved plums if the merchant's wife is feeling generous. As midday approaches, you both break for a simple meal. Hard bread, onion, and something that might once have been cheese. Elias eats silently. You do too, because chewing drowns out the sound of your fingers throbbing from the awl. You ask about sandals. Elias snorts. That's Roman stuff. We're not parading, we're surviving. And boots? For soldiers and show-offs. Waste of leather unless you're riding or stabbing someone. His daily routine doesn't stop after lunch. More cutting, more stitching, a repair job for a boy's scuffed slipper, a consultation with a baker who insists on arch support like it's a thing. Elias nods, offers a scrap of wool for padding, and adds an extra stitch or two to pretend it's special. Your hands are cramping by the time the sun starts sinking. The shadows stretch. The air smells different now, like chimney smoke and stewed cabbage. Elias wipes his hands, looks over your botched first shoe attempt, and grunts. You'll get worse before you get better. Before you rest, there's still one last task, oiling the day's shoes. You rub warm goose fat into the leather to protect it from damp. It's greasy, smelly, and surprisingly satisfying, like smoothing balm onto a patient's skin. You finish in near darkness. Elias lights a tallow candle and places it by the last. You both stare at the shoes for a long time, not because they're beautiful, but because they're done. Tomorrow brings more feet, more hides, more holes. But tonight you've earned every blister. You lie back on your straw pallet, the faint scent of leather in your hair, your fingertips sore and waxy. Outside, the wind howls down the chimney, and you wonder how many feet will step across cobblestones tomorrow, trusting your shaky handiwork to hold. The next morning, you're woken not by the rooster this time, but by the clink, scrape, clunk of metal on wood. Elias is already up, sharpening something by candlelight. It's not even dawn. You sit up slowly, every joint stiff like your body's been drying on a rack overnight. You creep to the workbench, curious. That noise, it's the sound of tools, the medieval cobbler's true companions. Elias is polishing an awl, a small pointed spike used for making holes in leather. Nearby, other tools are laid out with care, some familiar, most not. They look like a mix between surgical instruments and ancient torture devices. Before you can make a shoe, Elias murmurs without looking up, you have to know your tools. They'll teach you if you listen. You lean in closer. The bench is cluttered, but each tool seems to have its place. First is the last, that wooden foot mold you saw yesterday. Elias has a few of them, different sizes, worn smooth with use. One even has carvings on it, likely the product of a bored apprentice or someone with romantic feelings for feet. Next is the shoemaker's knife, crescent-shaped and razor-sharp. It slices hides like butter, but will also, as you've learned, slice thumbs with no hesitation. There are clinchers, shaped like strange pliers, used to pinch leather and hammer nails. There's a lapping stone for smoothing out edges, and tiny rasps for shaving away rough bits of sole. You find a peg awl used to start holes for wooden pegs, and then, your favorite, a weird stubby hammer with a polished head, used not for smashing, but persuading leather to do what it doesn't want to do. Modern people might assume medieval shoemakers had nothing but crude tools. In truth, their gear was precise, adapted over centuries. A good cobbler treated tools like sacred relics. Some were even passed from master to apprentice, generation after generation, like heirlooms. Mainstream historical fact alert. By the 13th century, specialized shoemaking tools existed in nearly every European region, many of them similar to the ones found in Roman times. Craftsmanship evolved more slowly than you might think, but the fundamentals stuck around. Elias picks up a bristle, a stiff piece of pig hair, and fastens it to the end of waxed linen thread. It's primitive, yes, but shockingly strong. When Elias pulls the thread through a punched hole, the bristle guides it like a needle without the metal. Less breakage, more control. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some cobblers used catgut strings instead of thread for certain types of shoes, especially if they needed extra durability. Catgut, despite the name, is usually made from sheep intestines. Still, the idea of threading your shoes with a bit of intestine might put you off your breakfast porridge. As the sky turns pale outside, Elias sets you on a task, tracing soles for a new pair of field shoes. You lay the last over a dampened hide, outline its shape with charcoal, then cut it with slow, deliberate strokes. Your hand trembles, your line wobbles. Elias glances over, but says nothing. Yet, while you work, he tells you a little secret. The trick isn't the tool, it's the pressure. Too soft and the blade skates, too hard and you slice too deep. You ask him if he's ever stabbed himself. He holds up his left hand and wiggles two crooked fingers. Ask again when you've sewn your thumb to a heel 3 times in 1 week. This moment, oddly tender, is interrupted by a loud whump. The front door flies open, and a teenage boy stumbles in, holding a shoe in both hands like it's a sick pet. The sole has come clean off. He mumbles something about falling in a ditch and a wrestling match with a goat. Elias listens with the patience of a man who's seen worse. He waves the boy off, examines the shoe, and snorts. Stitched with goat hair thread, that's what you get from buying cheap in the market. You're handed the shoe to prep for repair. It smells like wet leaves and bad choices. As you remove the old stitches, Elias hands you something odd. A heel iron, a small curved metal tool used for shaping the back of the shoe. It's cold and heavy, but fits your hand surprisingly well. He shows you how to rest the leather against it while tapping gently to round the heel. You do it wrong 3 times before finally feeling the leather curve beneath your will. Historians still argue whether medieval cobblers crafted all parts of the shoe themselves or relied on subcontractors, especially in urban centers. Some evidence points to large operations dividing labor. One person for cutting, another for stitching, another for soles. But here in Elias's world, everything is done under one sagging roof. Start to finish. You notice the tools wear out, just like shoes. Blades need sharpening weekly. Awls get bent. Even the lasts eventually splinter. But no tool is discarded easily. Some are repaired with iron rivets, others reinforced with linen binding, like bandages on a wounded soldier. Before long, you begin to recognize the rhythm of the workshop. Cut, soak, stitch, hammer, fold, oil. It's a quiet symphony full of sharp scents and soft thuds. Elias moves like a man half dancing with ghosts. By mid-afternoon, you've managed your first proper heel. It's not perfect, but it holds. Elias nods, which in his language is the equivalent of thunderous applause. You feel a flicker of pride until your thread snaps and the bristle flies into your eye. So it goes. The tools are put away in careful order, not because Elias is neat, but because a misplaced knife can cost a finger. He wipes each one down with a rag soaked in oil and hangs them from a leather loop above the bench. As twilight settles, Elias places one of the lasts in your hands. "Make your own pair," he says simply. No guidance, no help, just a pile of hide, a handful of tools, and a crooked smile. You realize something important then. It's not just about learning which tool does what. It's about feeling when to use it, when to press, when to pull, when to leave well enough alone. These tools, they aren't just instruments. They're extensions of Elias's body. His cracked fingers, his bent spine, his years of solitude and stubbornness. And tonight, maybe for the first time, they're yours too. You're barely awake when Elias tosses a bundle of hide into your lap. "He's here," he says, "the apprentice." At first, you think he means you, but then the door creaks, and in comes a boy, 15 at most, wiry as a plucked chicken and about as cheerful. His tunic is too short, his knees are filthy, and he's trying very hard not to look impressed. Spoiler, he fails. His name's Garel, or Gareth. You can't tell because he mumbles. He's been sent by his family to learn the trade, which mostly means they couldn't feed him anymore and thought shoes were less likely to kill him than swordplay. The first thing Garel does is trip over the last. Not metaphorically, he literally walks into it, sends it clattering, and then tries to catch it midair with the enthusiasm of a drunk juggler. Elias doesn't yell. He just sighs the sigh of a man who's seen this before. Today, your job isn't to stitch, it's to help train Garel. A dangerous proposition, considering you've only recently stopped sewing your own sleeve to the sole. Still, Elias is off in the corner, mending a boot for a soldier who insists his feet are regal-sized, so the task falls to you. Garel is, in a word, hopeless. He holds the awl like a fork. He threads the waxed linen through the wrong end of the bristle. He tries to cut leather with the dull side of the knife. At one point, he attempts to punch a hole into the table instead of the hide. You're not even sure he's blinking correctly. You try to demonstrate. Firm hand, you say, steady pressure. But he just blinks and says, "Like churning butter?" You've never churned butter, but you're pretty sure that's not the right comparison. The truth is, apprentices like Garel were standard practice in medieval trades. Boys, sometimes girls, though far less commonly, were sent to live with a master craftsman, working for food, board, and maybe a pair of socks if they didn't screw up too badly. It was a long, grueling path. 7 years was typical, during which the apprentice was little more than a servant with a stitching needle. Historical fact: the word journeyman comes from the French journée, meaning day. After apprenticeship, a cobbler might become a journeyman, paid daily as he traveled in search of work and knowledge. Only after proving his skill and sometimes bribing the guild could he become a master and open his own shop. Garel is at the very start of that ladder, and right now he's clinging to the bottom rung like a baby possum. You try to help him trace a sole, but he presses too hard and snaps the charcoal. "Is it cursed?" he whispers. You sigh. To lighten the mood, Elias tells the story of his own apprentice days. He once stitched 2 left shoes by accident and gave them to a visiting friar. The man wore them without complaint for months. Said it was penance. Elias says, eyes twinkling, "Here's your quirky tidbit. Some cobblers, especially in rural villages, doubled as minor surgeons, removing splinters, lancing blisters, even straightening toes. The logic? If you know how feet work in leather, maybe you know how they work in skin." Dangerous logic, but practical. By midday, Garel has managed to make a loop of thread and stab himself 3 times. He's bleeding lightly from a finger, but insists he can keep going. "It's not that bad," he says, clearly trying to impress you. You let him continue, mostly because it's entertaining. Elias, meanwhile, is teaching by absence. He's let you flounder with the boy, just as someone once let him. It's the medieval way. Minimal instruction, maximum trial and error. Geralt's hands are trembling, his eyes are puffy from squinting, but he keeps at it. That counts for something. Then, around the firelight hour, something miraculous happens. Geralt finishes a single stitch that actually holds. It's not pretty, and it's definitely crooked, but it stays in place. Elias looks over, says nothing, but hands the boy a stale hunk of bread as if to say good enough. You both collapse near the hearth, Geralt proudly cradling his one-stitched scrap like a newborn. He asks, "When do I make real shoes?" Elias barks a laugh. "When your stitches stop making the leather cry." Historians still argue how much formal training apprentices actually received versus how much they picked up from just being around the work. Some sources suggest structured teaching. Others imply it was mostly imitation. In Geralt's case, it's definitely the latter, with a generous dash of chaos. Later that night, you find Geralt asleep in the corner, mouth open, thread still tangled in his fingers. Elias covers him with a spare wool cloak, muttering, "Let him dream of boots." He says it like a joke, but there's warmth in it. You realize then that every cobbler began as a blundering child with sore fingers and frayed patience. The skill comes not from talent, but from doing it wrong 1,000 times until something finally works. And in the soft candlelight, you wonder how many shoes in the kingdom were made by boys like Geralt, bloody-thumbed, nervous, hopeful. You turn in for the night, exhausted, but strangely satisfied. Outside, the wind hisses through the cracks in the timber walls. Inside, a boy dreams of leather, a master pretends not to care, and you finally feel like part of something. Dawn spills across the workshop floor like thin broth, stretching toward a pile of hides that reek faintly of vinegar and goat. You wake to Elias already mid-argument with himself. He's muttering about cheap tanners and sloppy cuts while holding up a slab of leather like it insulted his mother. Today's theme, leather politics. Because in the medieval world, not all hides are created equal, and cobblers knew this better than anyone. Elias tosses you a rag and points to a row of hides leaning against the back wall. "Cow, goat, pig," he says. 3 animals, 3 tempers. Learn their moods or ruin your day. You run your hand along the surfaces. Cowhide is thick and rough, ideal for soles or heavy-duty boots. Goat is softer, stretchier, better for uppers or indoor shoes. Pig? Well, pigskin is weird. It has a coarse grain and those unmistakable follicle holes that make it look like a cheese grater. Elias calls it God's afterthought. Now comes the drama. A tanner has just delivered a new batch of hides, and Elias is not pleased. You see, in medieval towns, tanners and cobblers had a strained marriage, mutually dependent but constantly squabbling. Tanners made the leather, cobblers made it wearable, but if the tanning was rushed or sloppy, the shoe wouldn't last a week. Guess who got blamed? Elias sniffs one of the hides, scowls and mutters, He used too much lime. He gestures to the powdery surface. Over-limed leather turns brittle. Not ideal when you're walking through swampy fields or plague-stricken alleys. Mainstream historical fact: leather tanning in the Middle Ages was a truly wretched business. Tanners soaked skins in urine, pigeon droppings, or fermented bark, depending on the technique and region. The process took weeks and produced such an unbearable stench that tanning was banned inside most city walls. The result? Tanners were often relegated to riversides and social margins. Elias knows his suppliers well. One tanner uses too much alum. Another thins the hides too much to save weight. Some even try to pass off goat as calf, which is practically a criminal offense in his eyes. To make matters worse, a new cobbler in town, Nico, from 3 alleys over, is hoarding all the best cowhide. Elias suspects he's bribing the tanners with salted fish or something equally nefarious. The workshop turns briefly into a den of conspiracy. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some tanners believe the phase of the moon affected how well a hide would cure. Waxing moon, waxy leather, they'd say. Superstition ran deep, even when dealing with cow skin. Elias lets you choose a hide for today's project, a pair of mid-range walking shoes for a brewer's wife. Not fancy, but she walks all over town delivering kegs and has strong opinions about arch support. You reach for a goat hide, smooth, pliable, a soft gray-brown that almost smells sweet. Elias raises an eyebrow, but doesn't object. He watches you trace the pattern and begin to cut, nodding silently. She's got wide feet, he says. Give her space, but don't make it floppy. Classic Elias, encouraging and scolding in one breath. As you work, Garel arrives, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, cradling his hands like they've been personally insulted by the awl. You assign him to prep the pigskin, because, if nothing else, it builds character. You notice something odd as you cut, a faint discoloration near the hide's edge. Water damage? Maybe the hide sat too long in the rain. You ask Elias. He scowls again and mutters something that rhymes with tanner's tricks. This brings up an important point. Historians still argue whether medieval shoemakers did any tanning themselves. Some sources say rural cobblers tanned small batches behind their shops using makeshift pits. Others claim tanning was always separate, too complex, too smelly, too regulated. Judging by Elias's rants, he'd sooner lick a plague cart than take up tanning. Midway through the morning, a messenger arrives from a nearby noble household. He needs 3 pairs of indoor slippers by Sunday. Rich folk love their rush orders. Elias groans but accepts. The message also includes a request. No pigskin. Apparently, the lady of the manor thinks it makes her feet smell. You and Geralt share a look. Everything in here smells like pigskin. Lunch is salted fish on hard bread again. Geralt tries to soften his by soaking it in the leather bucket. Elias doesn't even react. You're beginning to think he's immune to absurdity. Back to the hides. You finish cutting the goat leather and begin stitching the uppers. The leather behaves. It folds gently, stretches without tearing, holds the thread like a well-trained page boy. You realize why some cobblers preferred goat, despite its reputation for fragility. Elias watches from the corner. Don't get sentimental. Goat's good, but not for farmers. One sharp rock, and she's limping all the way home. Pigskin, on the other hand, is tough. It resists water, shrugs off scratches, and has a texture like pebbled bark. But it's hard to sew and doesn't age well. You make a note to avoid it unless you're crafting something disposable or cursed. That evening, Elias sits you both down with a rare treat, spiced wine and a bit of boiled egg, a cobbler's feast. He talks for once about his old master, how he taught Elias to smell a hide and tell the age of the beast, how to slice along the spine for the best grain, how to avoid hideworm infestations that left the leather riddled with holes like it had been attacked by moths on meth. You don't just learn to make shoes, Elias says. You learn to read the beast it came from. A shoe starts in the pasture. Outside, the town bells ring. Another day gone. Gorell is snoring under the bench. You finish stitching the second shoe, lay it next to its twin, and admire the subtle gleam of oiled goat leather. 3 hides, 100 arguments, and the whisper of Tanner's secrets stitched invisibly into every soul. You may walk on them, but the kingdom stands on them. The cobblestone street outside is unusually noisy today, filled with clattering carts, cursing fishmongers, and an accordion player who clearly has no idea how to play the accordion. Inside the workshop, however, you're about to face something far more dangerous: fashion. Elias drops a pair of shoes on the table with a groan. They're strange. Long, pointed toes curl upward like little leather scythes. Decorative stitching spirals across the instep, and bright red dye bleeds from the seams like the shoes are blushing. Poulaines, he mutters with contempt, for someone important and ridiculous. You blink at the absurd design. Aren't these dangerous to walk in? Yes, Elias says. That's the point. Welcome to the wild, wobbly world of medieval shoe shapes, where function often bowed down to form, and where shoes weren't just made to walk. They were made to speak, and sometimes they said very stupid things. You may be used to the idea that people in the Middle Ages dressed plainly. That's mostly true for peasants. But the upper classes, they had a flair for footwear, especially in the 14th and 15th centuries, when elongated toes, high arches, and embroidered uppers signaled status, wealth, and the potential to trip over your own ego. These shoes, Poulaines, named after Poland, where the style supposedly originated, were all the rage among nobles, courtiers, and anyone trying to look like they owned more than 3 turnips. Some had toes so long they had to be tied to the wearer's garters to keep them from flopping. That's right, shoelace suspenders. Elias shakes his head as he trims a curl of crimson-dyed leather. The longer the toe, the smaller the brain, That's what my master used to say. Mainstream historical fact. In 1463, the English King Edward IV passed a law banning poulaines with toes longer than 2 inches. That's how bad it got. Your shoes could literally be illegal. You help Elias trace out the pattern. It's strange and narrow, completely unlike the practical turn shoes you've grown used to. The leather is thinner, the lining softer. He explains that shoes like these weren't meant for walking far, just gliding around a hall, looking smug. And then there are the nails, tiny iron tacks for attaching the outer sole to the upper. Elias prefers to use wooden pegs when he can, but for high-status shoes, nothing beats the crisp ring of metal hammered into leather. It's not about comfort, he reminds you. It's about status. They want to leave a mark, sometimes literally. As you work, Garel stumbles in with a bundle of old shoes donated from the chapel. They're misshapen, flattened, and riddled with holes. Some even have patches made from parchment, literal book pages. He holds one up. This one's got Latin on it. Is that holy? Elias just shrugs. Could be a hymn. Could be a grocery list. Won't keep your feet dry either way. You spend the morning repairing the chapel shoes, but your eyes keep drifting to the poulaines on the table. Ridiculous, impractical, but somehow intriguing. You wonder who they're for. A merchant's daughter? A visiting noble? A bored bishop with flamboyant taste? Here's your quirky tidbit. Some of the most elaborate medieval shoes had bells stitched into the toes so that every step jingled like a court jester. Others were dyed with exotic plant pigments, madder root for red, woad for blue, even crushed insects for a deep purple. Wearing them was like shouting, "Look at me! I don't work in fields." Elias hates them, but he's good at making them. His fingers move faster when he's annoyed. You help him stitch the decorative upper, being careful to tuck the seams inward so nothing frays. Garel tries to help, but ends up sewing 2 shoes together. Elias tells him to practice knotting thread until his thumbs go numb. In the afternoon, a visitor arrives. A tall, powdered man with narrow shoes and an even narrower scowl. He's clearly the client. He barely steps into the workshop before sneezing from the leather smell. "These better fit," he sniffs. "The Count's feast is tomorrow." You measure his feet. They're oddly shaped, one wider than the other, toes bunched like he's been binding them for vanity. He frowns as you trace them. "Don't make them too roomy. I want them to look refined." You're about to mention that refined doesn't mix well with walking, but Elias shoots you a look. You nod and keep sketching. Historians still argue whether such fashion extremes were limited to the noble class or trickled down into merchant culture. Some paintings suggest even wealthier peasants dabbled in style, though how often they wore these fancier shoes is unclear. It may have been strictly for feast days and festivals, brief flirtations with luxury before returning to muddy normalcy. Once the client leaves, Elias lets out a long breath. He'll wear them for 3 hours and complain about blisters for a month. You finish one pair by sundown. The poulaines gleam in the firelight, silly, elegant, delicate. Elias holds them up and sighs. "Beautiful nonsense," he says. But his eyes are soft. He may grumble, but you can tell he takes pride in the craft, even when it's ridiculous. That night you find yourself dreaming of shoes that curl like dragon tails, that jingle and flash, that whisper stories from far-off lands. You dream of dancers in Turkish slippers, monks in woven sandals, warriors in hard-heeled boots. In the dream, you walk across the kingdom wearing one shoe from every village, each one stitched with its own accent, its own story. Some are cracked, some are gold, but all of them started here, in a dusty shop that smells like boiled cow. You wake with your feet cold and a curl of red leather stuck to your cheek. Another day ahead, more shapes to try, more stories to walk. The bell tolls from the town chapel, just as the morning fog begins to lift off the streets. Elias looks up from his stitching. "Market day," he says with a smirk. "Time to sell lies." You quickly learn what he means. It's not lying about quality. Elias would rather eat a boiled boot than make shoddy shoes. No, it's the art of salesmanship, medieval style, saying as little as possible and letting the leather speak for itself, preferably louder than the other cobblers shouting across the square. You and Gorell load a wooden cart with your wares, shoes lined up like loyal soldiers, turn shoes, low boots, slippers, a few suspiciously pointed poulaines, and one gloriously mismatched pair that no one wants to talk about. Elias adds a rolled-up awning, a stool, and a small chest containing spare laces, tools, and a single apple that's mostly worm. As you trundle into town, your wheels bounce over uneven cobbles. Chickens scatter. A dog follows you for 3 blocks before deciding you're not edible. The square is already a riot of colors and smells. Fish wrapped in reeds, onions braided like garlands, fabrics fluttering from carts, and shoes everywhere. You set up next to a woman selling beeswax and a toothless man offering miracle liniment for sore feet. Elias sneers. If his cure worked, we'd be out of work. Now begins the dance. Villagers pass, glance, sniff. Some poke at the leather like they're inspecting livestock. One old man demands to see the stitching inside the heel and mutters, better than last year." He doesn't buy anything. This is the first time you really see the commercial side of the cobbler's world. Back in the shop, it's sweat, tools, and practice. But here, under the open sky, it's all about presentation, trust, and mild deception. Mainstream historical fact. In many towns, cobblers were required to sell at public markets on designated days. Guild regulations often limited where, when, and even how shoes could be sold to prevent undercutting and chaos. Still, competition was fierce, and personalities mattered. You notice something clever about Elias's stall. The turn shoes are arranged by size, but with the best pair right in the center, eye level to passers-by. The cheaper pairs are near the edge for quick grabs. He's even hung a pair of high ankle boots on a wooden pole to draw the eye. "Not for sale," he says, just bait. Gorell, of course, nearly knocks the whole display over by sneezing. A customer approaches, a middle-aged woman with strong calves and stronger opinions. She points to a pair of low-cut slippers and says, "I want these." "But better." Elias smiles thinly and pulls out a pair with double stitching. "These were made for a brewer's wife. She hauls barrels. You haul complaints." Sold. The day unfolds in a blur of negotiations. A merchant wants 4 pairs for his staff, but insists on matching dye. Elias doesn't carry enough woad to make them truly blue, so he mixes crushed elderberries and soot. "If it rains, they'll turn purple," he mutters, then shrugs. "They'll match the bruises on his feet." Here's a quirky tidbit. Some cobblers kept a stash of mismatched shoes to sell to desperate buyers. "One tight, one loose, call it balance," Elias jokes, and sometimes he'd sell shoes intended for the dead, simple, unsold pairs used to bury the poor. If the living were desperate enough, they didn't care. You'd take a break and wander the square. Other cobblers shout their slogans. One promises Italian curves at local prices. Another offers elf shoes for children, tiny pointed things dyed bright green. You see someone hawking clogs, heavy wooden ones used in the boggy north. A few even sell patterned uppers, just the tops of shoes, for customers to bring to their own cobblers. Medieval modular fashion, basically. Historians still argue whether most town cobblers sold directly or through guild-controlled stalls. Some evidence points to free market behavior in smaller villages, while larger cities enforced strict quotas, price caps, and material standards. In Elias's case, the rules are clear. Sell what you can, smile when you must, and never trust a buyer with 2 clean feet. You return to the stall just in time to see Gorell struggling to explain shoe sizes to a night squire. "It's, like your foot, but in leather." He's not wrong, but Elias intervenes before the squire demands satisfaction via duel. Afternoon light turns golden. Business slows. You've sold 10 pairs, bartered 3 more, and repaired a farmer's sandal in exchange for a wedge of goat cheese. Geralt sits beneath the awning eating a bruised apple and looking like he's aged 5 years. Then a familiar voice cuts through the crowd. Nico, the rival cobbler. He's younger, flashier, and smells like lavender. He walks by slowly, inspecting your shoes with mock admiration. "Ah, Elias," he says. "Still doing the single-row stitch, I see. Very quaint." Elias doesn't flinch. Better than hiding poor glue with fancy dye. The tension crackles. Customers glance over, intrigued. You brace for a cobbler duel, a slap fight with awls and bristle whips, but it ends with a tight nod and mutual disdain. As the sun dips low, you pack up the cart. Elias counts the coin. Not much, but enough. "Next week," he says, "we'll bring more poulains. The nobles are back from wherever they go to feel important." The walk home is quiet. Your hands are sore, your legs ache, and your brain hums with the noise of barter and bellows. But Beneath it all, something else stirs. Pride. Not just in what you made, but in what you sold. Shoes aren't just stitched, they're pitched. And today, for the first time, you helped a kingdom put its best foot forward. The next morning begins with a knock. Not the polite kind, but the kind that says, I own the door, and possibly you. Elias groans, wipes his hands on a rag, and mutters, It's the guild. You freeze. You've heard Elias complain about them, but never seen them up close. Garel once whispered that they wear matching cloaks, carry scrolls, and smell like candle wax and fear. He's not far off. The door creaks open, and in glide two figures, one tall, one wider than seems reasonable. Both wear wool tunics with stitched badges, an emblem of a boot with crossed awls. That's the Cobbler's Guild, the ancient, ever-watchful brotherhood that ensures the shoe trade stays respectable, or at least regulated. Elias doesn't bow. He just gestures to a stool and says, You're early. The tall one, with a quill tucked behind his ear like a dagger, opens a parchment and begins muttering measurements. The other one, sweat glistening like he's allergic to movement, starts inspecting shoes without asking. Welcome to your first taste of medieval shoe bureaucracy. Mainstream historical fact. By the 13th century, most towns in Europe had formal guilds governing trades like shoemaking. These organizations controlled everything: who could train, what could be sold, what materials were allowed, and even the width of your soles. Mess with them, and you might be fined, exiled, or worse, publicly humiliated with a giant fake shoe tied around your neck. Today, they've come for a routine check, or so they say. They measure the stitch length on a pair of poulaines, inspect the heel depth of some ankle boots, and sniff one of the goat-hide turn shoes with such intensity you wonder if they're part hound. Garel offers them a cup of cider. It's ignored. Then comes the questioning. Who stitched these? The tall one asks, tapping a slightly uneven seam. You raise your hand. The shorter one grunts, Apprentice? Elias answers, Journeyman in practice, not on paper. That's bold. You're still new, but Elias just gave you a battlefield promotion. You try not to look smug. You fail. The guildman notices and frowns. He rolls out a wax tablet and begins etching a few marks. Not a fine, yet, but close. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some cobblers' guilds issued annual inspection shoes that all apprentices had to reproduce before becoming journeymen. Fail, and you stayed in servitude another year. Succeed, and you earned a small coin, a handshake, and the right to move to another town, where another guild would test you again. Elias passes most of the inspection. His nails are properly spaced, his tools accounted for. His apprentices haven't mutinied yet. But then they reach the back shelf. There, half hidden under scraps, lies an experimental shoe. Your experimental shoe. You tried to stitch a zigzag seam for flair, reinforced the toe with doubled layers, and dyed it with crushed blackberries. It's hideous. It smells like pie. The guildman picks it up, sniffs, pauses. This pattern isn't approved, he says slowly. It's not for sale, Elias replies. Training only. The tall one leans in. Even so, innovation should be submitted to the guild for review, else the market suffers. You want to argue. You want to shout, "It's just a shoe." But Elias places a calming hand on your shoulder. They'll survive one mistake. The guild departs an hour later, leaving behind a slip of parchment noting a verbal caution and a reminder to pay quarterly dues. You exhale for the first time in what feels like a week. Historians still argue whether guilds were protective or oppressive. Some see them as a worker's shield against greedy lords. Others see them as gatekeepers, stifling creativity and protecting entrenched masters. Like most things medieval, it was probably both. Fair until it wasn't. Helpful until you had ideas. Later that day, Elias hands you the rejected shoe. Burn it? You ask. He shakes his head. Keep it. Worst ideas often lead to better ones. Just don't let them see it again. You stash it in the rafters. Garel, emboldened by your brush with infamy, decides to invent something too. He spends an hour trying to glue moss into the lining of a slipper for cushioning. It smells like a forest dyed. Elias tells him he's banned from glue for a week. By sundown, things return to normal. Stitch, oil, hammer, sigh. But something's changed. You now see the rules, those invisible threads tying all cobblers to a centuries-old system. You understand that every sole you cut must balance not just foot and earth, but freedom and formality. You're not just shaping leather, you're navigating a maze of customs, approvals, and silent expectations. But still, beneath the parchment and protocol, the shoe remains. A small, quiet rebellion stitched in waxed thread. It rains for 3 straight days. Not the gentle kind either. The kind that turns roads to soup, leaks through roof beams, and makes your toes squish inside your socks before breakfast. And that's precisely the problem. Wet feet. The cobbler's workshop smells stronger than usual. Damp leather, wet wool, boiled glue, and somewhere in the corner, Garel's moldy experiment from last week. Elias kicks it into the hearth with no ceremony. Today's challenge isn't just making shoes, it's making weatherproof shoes the medieval way, without rubber, without zippers, and definitely without Gore-Tex. You've barely hung your cloak before Elias tosses you a muddy pair of boots with soles peeling like old fruit. Farmer, he says, slipped in a pig trench. You peel them open and wince. The inner lining is shredded. The sole's been patched so many times it looks like a leather quilt. You glance at the toe. Oh, look, hey, and something suspiciously tooth-like. Elias smirks. This is why we seal seams. You learn quickly that a wet shoe is a dead shoe. Moisture softens stitches, loosens pegs, and encourages rot. Once the water seeps in, it's only a matter of time before the leather collapses into something resembling porridge. Mainstream historical fact. While medieval shoes weren't waterproof in the modern sense, cobblers developed surprisingly effective ways to make them water-resistant. The most common method? Grease, animal fat, beeswax, or fish oil rubbed into every seam, fold, and stitch until the leather could repel light rain like a duck's back. Elias prefers a mixture of beef tallow and beeswax. He warms it by the hearth until it glistens, then rubs it into the boots with a rag. You watch the leather darken and breathe, almost like skin taking in moisture, just the right kind this time. Garel wants to help, but instead of warming the wax gently, he puts the pot too close to the fire and nearly creates a grease bomb. The wall now smells like Sunday roast. Elias bans him from heat sources for the rest of the day. You start work on a new pair of high-ankle field boots. These aren't for dancing. They're for trudging through rivers, fending off mud, and hopefully not losing your toes to frostbite. Elias hands you uppers cut from thick cowhide, less flexible, more durable. You stitch slowly, reinforcing every seam with double thread. Then comes a layer of beeswax rubbed along the edges. Not too much, it can stiffen the leather, but just enough to form a seal. You also learn a trick Elias calls pinching the welt, folding the edge of the sole upward slightly before sewing it to the upper. It creates a lip that sheds water away from the stitching. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some medieval farmers stuffed sheep's wool or dry moss into their shoes to absorb moisture, primitive insoles. Others smeared pitch or tar around the edges to block leaks, which worked until the shoe warmed up and started to melt. Tar shoes, effective and disgusting. Around midday, the farmer arrives. Big man, bigger feet, and a laugh that shakes the windows. He inspects the repaired boots, nods in approval, then tests them by dumping a mug of water on the toe. It runs off clean. Elias charges 2 copper pennies. The man pays with 1 coin and a slab of smoked eel. Garel looks horrified. Elias accepts it without blinking. By afternoon, it's your turn to get creative. Elias gives you a challenge. Design a shoe for a herbalist, someone who walks from village to village, often through forests and bogs. The shoe needs to be flexible but dry, strong but not stiff. You brainstorm while sipping thin soup and watching rain smear the window. Eventually, you settle on a hybrid design, a flexible goat leather upper with a thick cowhide sole, stitched using a method Elias calls reverse binding, where the seam is turned inward, protected from splash. You even add a narrow tongue flap under the laces to block water from sneaking in. You present the sketch to Elias. He nods once. Try it. It takes hours. Stitching soft leather to thick hide feels like sewing jelly to wood. But by nightfall, the shoe holds. You wax the seams, oil the sole, and even line the inside with a scrap of woven linen for comfort. Now, Elias says, you'll wear it. It's pitch black and still raining. You step outside, mud instantly claiming your ankles. The leather creaks. Your toes clench. Water pools around the heel, but doesn't soak through. You walk to the well and back, feet dry. You return triumphant. Garel claps like you just invented fire. Elias just shrugs. It's passable. Historians still argue how many cobblers specialized in weatherproof shoes versus just repairing them endlessly. Some believe there were distinct types of shops: field boot makers, city shoemakers, slipper specialists. Others argue most cobblers were generalists, adapting their work based on local terrain and client needs. In any case, you now understand just how much effort goes into something most people never think about. Keeping feet dry in the 1300s wasn't just a comfort, it was survival. Wet feet meant trench foot, blisters, infections, and good luck treating that with leeches and a prayer. That night, you place your damp cloak on the fire grate and admire your prototype. It's not beautiful. It won't win courtly approval, but it might get someone safely from one village to the next without frostbite. And maybe that's enough. At first light, Elias is hunched over the workbench with a shoe in one hand and a broken knife in the other. You catch just the end of a grumble, something about cheap steel and blades that couldn't cut butter on a warm day. Today isn't about leather. It's about tools, the unsung heroes of shoemaking, the iron, horn, wood, and bone implements that stand between your hands and a shredded hide. You've worked with them daily, but you haven't really known them, not like Elias does, not like you're about to. He starts by laying them out in rows. Every tool has a purpose, he says. Use the wrong one, and you ruin the leather, or your fingers, or both. There's the awl, sharp as a wasp's sting, used to pierce holes in leather without tearing, the curved needle for threading thick linen or hemp through stubborn hides. The last, a wooden foot form used for shaping shoes. You've seen Elias talk to his last like an old friend. You assumed it was eccentricity. Now you think it's reverence. Then comes the cobbling knife, short, curved, wickedly sharp. It's used for everything from trimming soles to slicing thread, and in a pinch, for fending off rats. Garel's been banned from touching it after nearly losing a thumbnail, twice. Mainstream historical fact. Most medieval cobblers either made their own tools or had them crafted by local blacksmiths. Standardization didn't exist. Your awl might be a filed-down nail. Your hammer might have a bone handle. A good tool wasn't a luxury, it was survival. Elias shows you how to sharpen an edge using a river stone, adding spit and patience. He teaches you the rhythm, not fast, not slow, just steady. The blade's not your enemy, he says. Treat it like a partner, unless it bites. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some cobblers believed sharpening blades during a full moon improved their edge retention. Others whispered that burying a dull knife in ash overnight could scare it sharp. You're not sure which school Elias belongs to, but you did catch him muttering at a blade once. You spend the morning rehandling a hammer with a splintered grip. The handle is ashwood, polished smooth by years of use. Elias insists on a perfect balance, too top-heavy and you dent the sole, too light and the nails don't hold. Then he hands you a mystery tool. It looks like a curved claw with two prongs and a little gear at the center. Guess. You turn it over. Shoe, torture device? He smirks. Edge groover, cuts a channel for stitching, keeps the thread from fraying underfoot. You try it on a scrap. It skims the leather's surface, peeling back a tiny perfect strip. A groove no wider than a grain of barley. It feels surgical. As you test it, Elias disappears into the back and returns with something wrapped in old linen, a long, dark, slightly curved piece of wood. My first last, he says. It's worn smooth by decades of use. Tiny nail holes dot the toe. The heel's been scorched where he once dropped it in a hearth. He cradles it like a relic. Made from elm, he says, shaped it with a stolen file and too much pride. Didn't fit anyone's foot, but I used it anyway. Historians still argue whether most cobblers used standardized lasts or made bespoke ones for each customer. In wealthier towns, clients sometimes brought their own wooden foot forms, especially if they had unique feet. In rural areas, one or two general lasts were stretched, padded, or cursed into fitting as needed. You learn to heat and bend a last slightly for fit adjustments. You shape a broken awl handle using bone scraps from a butcher. You carve a thread spool from an old spoon's handle. By mid-afternoon, you realize something odd. The tools are becoming familiar, not in a just using them way, more like they're learning you too. Gerald, meanwhile, attempts to make his own tool, a dual-thread needle holder meant to stitch two seams at once. It falls apart after one use. It's not a failure, he insists. It's pre-invented. Elias says nothing, just raises an eyebrow so high it might escape his forehead. You finish the day stitching a new sole with your freshly sharpened awl. The holes punch cleaner. The thread glides smoother. Your rhythm matches the soft thunk of Gorell dropping tools and cursing quietly. As evening sets in, Elias offers something rare, a compliment. Your thread holes are nearly round. That's not nothing. You nod, holding back a grin. But it means more than it sounds. Tool mastery is the line between apprentice and artisan. A good eye can spot a shaky stitch from across a stall. A bent awl can ruin a week's work. You're learning not just to make shoes, but to control the hands that shape them. That night, you sit by the hearth, all in one hand, groover in the other. You flip them back and forth, feeling the balance. They feel like extensions now, not foreign, not dangerous, just right. It begins with a scream, a very specific scream, the kind that says, "I've stepped on something I definitely shouldn't have." You and Gorell sprint to the street outside the workshop. There, hopping on one foot and howling, is a thatched roof roofer, barefoot and clutching his big toe. You spot the culprit, a jagged nail protruding from an old plank. Blood, thankfully, is minimal. Pride, terminal. Elias arrives with a linen rag and a grimace. Didn't your mother tell you not to climb roofs barefoot? She also said cabbage keeps demons away. The man wheezes. Can you fix it? And that's how you meet your next challenge. Orthopedic shoemaking. Medieval style. The roofer can't walk properly, but he still needs to work. Something with a soft heel, he says, and room for swelling, and maybe some luck. You're used to regular foot shapes by now. Wide, narrow, flat, bony. But injured feet, that's new territory. Elias calls it field medicine with laces. You call it terrifying. He pulls out a battered last, one side shaved thinner. Old soldier's foot, he says. Twisted ankle never healed. Similar shape? You trace the roofer's foot onto scrap parchment and begin sketching ideas. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval cobblers often doubled as basic orthopedic specialists, crafting mismatched shoes, thick-soled boots, or toe-angled sandals to accommodate war injuries, birth defects, or diseases like gout. Without podiatrists or physical therapy, the right shoe was treatment. Elias opens a box of scraps, felt, linen, sheepskin, and oddly cut wedges of cork and leather. These are for adjustments, he explains. Stack them, sew them, wedge them. Think like a bone. You start with a soft-lasted shoe, flexible enough to avoid pressure on the toe, but firm enough to keep the foot stable. You add a layer of wool padding around the heel and a lifted arch made from folded linen, stitched carefully into the sole. Gerald watches, fascinated. Looks like a meat pie. You're not wrong, Elias mutters. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some towns, cobblers crafted pilgrim shoes for the sick and lame traveling to healing shrines. These shoes were often inscribed with tiny prayers stitched into the lining or etched into the sole. One surviving pair had the words, "Saint Elmo, guard this foot," scratched beneath the heel. You're tempted to write something encouraging under this one too. Perhaps avoid planks or bless this toe. Elias doesn't object. By noon, you've finished the base structure, a right shoe with extra depth near the toes, padding at the instep, and an adjustable flap with a soft leather lace, easier to loosen if swelling occurs. You soak the leather gently to allow for some stretch and test it on your own foot. It feels weird, but promising. The roofer returns, limping. He eyes the shoe suspiciously. Looks like something a priest would wear to bed. Try it, Elias says, folding his arms. He slips it on with some effort, then takes a step, then another, then stomps. Doesn't hurt, he says, amazed. Feels warm, secure. Elias nods. Don't run a marathon and stay off planks. The roofer leaves, satisfied and only mildly offended. Historians still argue how widespread orthopedic adaptations were in medieval shoemaking. Some point to archaeological finds of asymmetrical shoes and lifted heels as evidence of deliberate medical intervention. Others argue these were just clumsy repairs or personal preference. What's clear, no one else was helping, so cobblers filled the gap. That afternoon, word spreads. A tanner's daughter with a clubbed foot arrives, asking for sandals. A brewer's cousin with a limp wants boots that won't trip him. A nun even sends a message requesting slippers that won't irritate her bunions. You realize, slowly, that customization isn't a luxury, it's survival. These people don't want beauty. They want to walk without pain, to work, to kneel, to dance, even if crookedly. You help Elias draft a new pattern, one side higher, one lower. He shows you how to build up one sole with stacked leather, glued, pegged, and stitched. It's like carving a foot from memory, he says. Garel tries to help by designing a multi-foot boot intended to fit anyone. It ends up looking like a leather sock puppet. Elias gives him a broom. By evening, you've built two strange, beautiful shoes. One curves like a crescent. The other has a sole as thick as your thumb. Neither matches anything else in the shop, but they match the feet that need them. That night, you look at the shelf. Most shoes there are neat, symmetrical, predictable. But these twisted, padded, built-up marvels live. They reflect the people who wear them, flaws and all. And for the first time you realize cobblers don't just fix shoes, they fix people. Elias wakes you early, before the sun, before the town roosters had a chance to scream himself awake. He holds a worn satchel and a small bundle of tools wrapped in oilcloth. No words, just a nod. Today you're going on the road. Shoes don't grow roots, Elias says as you walk, boots crunching frost-crusted leaves. Neither do cobblers. Sometimes we go to them. You and Gerald follow him out of town, past sleepy cottages and shuttered mills, through fields blanketed with early mist. You're visiting the outer villages, farmland settlements too small or poor to have their own full-time cobbler. Some of these places haven't seen shoe repairs in months. Some villagers have resorted to stuffing rags into sandals or wearing just soles tied on with cord. It's a different world than the tidy stalls and cobbled streets of town. Mainstream historical fact. Traveling cobblers were common, especially in rural Europe. They either wandered from village to village offering repairs or were summoned seasonally to perform mass work. Some even lived with families for weeks, trading repairs for food and shelter. Your first stop is a thatched hamlet called Totherley. A few homes, a broken chapel, and a pig with more teeth than you'd prefer. Children trail behind you, fascinated by your tools. Gerald hands one of them a wooden shoe form. "For your doll," he says. The girl replies, "My doll's a frog," and runs off. You set up beneath a shed awning while Elias examines the villagers' shoes. They arrive with bundles, cracked boots, sandals with half the straps missing, mismatched slippers, shoes held together with string and hope. It's a parade of pain, and some aren't shoes at all. One man walks over in what appears to be bark tied with flax cord. "Made it myself," he says proudly. Elias blinks. "I can see that." You lay out your supplies, thick linen thread, awls, beeswax, spare soles, scraps of pigskin. The setup is rougher, but the work feels oddly pure. There are no nobles here, no guild inspections, just need. You stitch 2 straps for an old woman who's wrapped her feet in wool and oilskin. You hammer out nails from a child's shoe and replace the sole with 2 layers of bark-reinforced hide. You even improvise a heel lift for a man whose left leg is shorter than the right, using bits of willow bark and layered hide. He tests it and grins. "Feel like I've stopped falling left." Here's a quirky tidbit. In remote areas, villagers sometimes buried broken shoes at the edge of fields to keep the land working. A strange mix of pagan and practical, retiring old souls where the soil might absorb their effort. You spot one near a tree, leather strips knotted around a stone. Elias nods solemnly. "Better that than wearing it another day." After lunch, bread, cheese, and something Gorell swears was once an onion, you pack up and walk to the next village. 2 more miles, boots thudding against hardened mud. You arrive at dusk in Lundar's Hollow, where you're greeted like saints. The local healer has kept shoes stitched with animal sinew and nettle fiber. She's eager to trade knowledge, showing you her sewing technique. It's ugly, but it's held up. Historians still argue how much cross-skill existed between cobblers and herbalists, midwives, or general tinkerers. Some scholars argue village healers acted as de facto shoemakers when needed. Others believe that even in rural areas, leatherwork remained specialized. Either way, someone had to keep people walking. Elias spends an hour with an old farmer who insists his right boot is cursed. You check it. It's not cursed. It's just moldy. You replace the insole and gently sprinkle rosemary in the lining. "There," you say, "blessed by St. Crispin." The farmer gives you a chicken. That night, you stay in the barn of a local widow who remembers Elias from years ago. You sit by a fire, soles drying on pegs above the smoke. The stars outside shine like puncture holes in the sky, and you realize something. This is cobbling in its oldest, rawest form. No shop, no polished tools, no customers arguing over fashion. Just tired feet, tired shoes, and people who need both to keep going. Elias unwraps a small notebook, leather-bound, its pages warped by damp. Inside are sketches, feet, soles, even whole village maps with notes. That boy in Greystone, missing a toe, needs angled sole. Old woman near Fellwood likes thick arch pads. He doesn't just remember customers. He documents feet like a priest would document sins. You ask why. He shrugs. Because no one else will. And next time, I want to bring something that works. Gorell is already asleep, snoring into a pile of bootstraps. You stay awake a little longer, watching the shoes by the fire. Each one is rough, mismatched, patched, or bent. But every one of them walked someone here, and tomorrow they'll walk again. The next morning, the sun barely a whisper behind clouds, Elias wakes you with a slap of cold leather to the shoulder. "Royal summons," he says. "Pack fast. You're about to smell nobility." You blink. "A noble needs shoes?" "No," Elias replies. "A noble needs attention. Shoes are just the excuse." By noon, you're walking through the gates of Durnhold Manor, a sprawling estate surrounded by trimmed hedges, imported peacocks, and footmen whose sole job seems to be judging you silently. The steward meets you at the entrance. He sniffs at your cloak, then your shoes. "You're the cobbler?" Elias nods once, unimpressed. The steward sighs. "Upstairs, West Wing, Lady Aldith awaits. Mind the parquet." The manor smells like lavender and candle smoke. Your boots squeak on the polished floor as you follow Elias through corridors longer than most streets back home. Tapestries line the walls. Saints, dragons, people wearing shoes too elegant to walk in. At last, the lady appears. She's draped in silks and lace, holding a single satin slipper like it's been personally offending her. "I ordered these 3 weeks ago," she says, looking only at Elias. "They pinch, the seam is crooked, and they make my feet look plebeian." Elias takes the slipper with a blank expression. You try not to laugh. Mainstream historical fact. Nobility often commissioned shoes as fashion statements rather than functional footwear. Materials like velvet, brocade, or dyed kid leather were common. The focus was on aesthetics. Comfort came second, if at all. You examine the slipper. The seam is indeed crooked, but that's not the real issue. Her feet, narrow at the heel, wide at the toe, don't suit dainty court shoes. She wants fashion to bend to anatomy, not the other way around. Elias says nothing, just begins measuring her foot anew. He carries a soft cloth tape marked in ink. Lady Aldith flinches. "Must you touch the toes?" "They're part of the foot, my lady." She scowls. You retreat to a side parlor, set up a small table, and begin sketching. This time, the challenge isn't mud or twisted ankles, it's vanity. You need to disguise width, elevate posture, and add an illusion of delicacy. Elias leans over your shoulder. Think peacock, but dignified. You design a slipper with a raised arch, slight curve along the outer edge, and a pointed toe with reinforced structure, but shallow enough not to crush her toes. The upper will be made of embroidered silk backed with fine leather for strength. A strip of delicate lambskin along the heel will provide comfort without bulk. Add a rosette, Gorell suggests, wandering in with a biscuit. Nobles love rosettes. He's not wrong. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some noble women in the late Middle Ages wore shoes dyed with cochineal beetle, imported and expensive to signal status. Others lined their shoes with crushed herbs or powdered perfumes, more for impression than hygiene. A single pair of slippers could cost more than a farmer's yearly rent. That afternoon you work in one of the manor's empty salons. Garel tests thread tension by pulling it between two candlesticks. You sew slowly, keeping the silk smooth. The rosette becomes a sculpted knot of silver thread ribbon. Lady Aldith's family crest, a falcon, gets embossed faintly at the heel. Elias raises an eyebrow, but allows it. Historians still argue whether medieval noblewomen's footwear was designed by cobblers or specialized court artisans. Some records point to guild-trained craftsmen receiving commissions. Others suggest traveling artisans or even imported shoes from Italy or Flanders. What's certain, nobles demanded fashion that matched their vanity, not their anatomy. The next day, you present the slippers on a velvet cloth, just as Elias instructed. Lady Aldith enters, arms crossed. She slips them on. Silence. Then 2 delicate steps across the carpet. "They don't squeak," she says. "That was the goal," Elias replies dryly. She walks the length of the room. Still snug, but tolerable. Coming from her, that's praise worthy of knighthood. She gestures at you both. "Send a second pair. Green velvet. Same fit." As you leave, the steward offers a small bag of silver coins and a box of sugared almonds. Geralt eats 3 before anyone else sees them. On the walk home, you ask Elias if he ever made royal court shoes. He grunts. "Once, for a bishop, man had 6 toes on 1 foot, demanded sandals." You laugh, then you stop. He's not joking. That night, back in the shop, you reflect. Village shoes are for survival, but noble shoes, they're theater, a performance for other rich people, and it's the cobbler's job to make sure the costume fits. Geralt bursts into the workshop like a thunderclap, holding something in both hands as if it's about to hatch. "A message," he pants, "from Master Willin." Elias doesn't look up from the boot he's stitching. "Dead?" "No," Geralt wheezes. "Retired. Says he's giving up his shop. Wants you to come." That stops Elias. He sets the boot down, slowly, carefully, then stands and dusts off his apron. "We'll leave at first light." You don't ask many questions, not at first. But by dawn, you're back on the road, this time heading east toward a cobbler's workshop said to be older than most churches. You travel over ridges and valleys, past fog-shrouded rivers and wind-blown fields. By midday, you arrive at a quiet village where the buildings lean slightly with age, like old men gossiping. Master Willin's workshop sits at the edge, timbers warped, roof mossy, door creaking like a songbird with a hangover. Willin himself is older than you imagined, beard like straw, hands gnarled into question marks, eyes full of mischief. "Elias," he rasps, "you still look angry." "And you still look like leather left in the rain," Elias replies. They embrace. Willin's shop is a museum of cobbling, wooden lasts of every imaginable shape and size, tools you don't recognize, soles nailed to rafters, sketches pinned to beams, a pair of shoes so tiny they could fit a cat. And in the center, something you've only heard rumors of, a treadle-powered stitcher. Mainstream historical fact. While most medieval shoes were stitched by hand, some workshops, especially in wealthier or more inventive regions, experimented with basic mechanical aids like treadle awls or foot-powered stitchers. These were rare, clunky, and mostly forgotten. But when they worked, they saved time and fingers. Willin gestures to it proudly. Built it myself, still faster than that butter-fingered boy I trained in '72. You and Garel spend hours exploring. Willin shares stories of shoemaking through plague years, wars, famine, and once a royal wedding where the bride demanded swan-skin slippers. He made them, then ate porridge for 6 months. But something's changed. Willin limps. His hands tremble. He picks up tools like they might explode. Elias doesn't mention it, but you see the heaviness in his eyes. The workshop is a treasure chest, but it's a chest that needs a new key. Willin brings out a ledger, thick, bound in hide, pages yellowed with age. It contains names, dates, shoe types, custom requests, oddities like heel insert for lady with hollow bone and slipper with hidden compartment, unspecified contents. He hands it to Elias. Yours now. Elias doesn't argue. Then Willin turns to you. Show me something, he says. You blink. Something I've made? No. Something new. Something you've never tried. You panic, then breathe. You take a strip of leather and start cutting. Your hands remember the groove stitch pattern Elias taught you, but this time you twist it. Add a cross brace under the ball of the foot. You stitch it into a sole made from boiled cowhide. Curve the arch a little higher than usual and carve a venting slit along the inner arch, an idea you picked up from a nun's request for cooler shoes. It's rough, bold, a little weird. Willin nods. You think like a fool. That's good. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval shoemakers carved messages into shoe soles for good luck. One famous example read, God keep thee from crooked paths. Another simply said, step true. Elias says Willin used to carve don't trip into every first pair an apprentice made. That night, Willin lights a pipe that smells like old apples and watches the hearth. He speaks softly. I used to think making shoes was about survival, but it's not. It's about movement. A shoe helps someone go to a market, a wedding, a battlefield, a grave. He hands Elias a small wooden box. Inside is a set of tiny worn tools, awl, bristle, needle, a sliver of flint. For the road. Where are you going? Elias asks. Willin shrugs. Not far. Just not here. Historians still argue whether master cobblers like Willin pass down trade secrets in books, oral stories, or simply through apprenticeship. Some guilds demanded that innovations be shared. Others were tighter-lipped, hoarding secrets like buried treasure. Willin, he just writes them in the margins. By morning, the shop is quieter. The dust seems thicker. Willin's gone for a walk he may not return from. You help Elias pack the ledger, the box, and a few tools. Gerald finds a pair of baby shoes and asks, "Think anyone wore these?" Elias smiles faintly. "Not for walking, maybe for remembering." You leave Willin's shop changed, not just with better tools, but with a deeper sense of what it means to inherit something. Not land, not money, but a craft, a path traced in leather, passed from soul to soul. Back in town, the workshop feels different. Familiar smells, leather, oil, ash, linger in the air, but something shifted. Willin's ledger now sits on Elias's bench like a relic. Gerald calls it the Gospel of Souls. He isn't far off. Elias doesn't speak much the next day. He just opens the ledger, flips to a random page, and points to an entry scribbled in spidery script. March 18th. Black court shoes for the royal scribe, sole lined with cork, insisted on noiseless step. He looks up. "That's what we're doing today." You blink. "You want silent shoes?" Elias nods. No clack, no creak, quiet enough for a man to walk behind a king without announcing his presence. It's absurd. It's delightful. It's stealth cobbling. Gerald immediately offers suggestions that include wrapping feet in cabbage leaves and stuffing shoes with goose down. Elias throws a rag at him. You begin by examining materials. Cowhide soles, too stiff, creak like cartwheels. Thin goatskin, flexible but wears out fast. Then you remember something from Willin's stories. Boiled wool inserts, padding with bite. Mainstream historical fact. Certain medieval professions, scribes, courtiers, spies, requested soft-soled footwear designed to muffle sound. These often used wool, felt, or even soft leather sewn inside the sole as an acoustic buffer. Some nobles wore such shoes indoors to avoid disturbing others or being heard sneaking around. You take thin rawhide, soften it in water, and layer it over boiled wool. Then you bind both into a sole using a wrap stitch pattern Elias calls the serpent loop. It holds tight without needing thick nails or pegs. The upper is calfskin, fine grain, subtle, bends with breath. You double-stitch the edges, keeping seams inward to reduce rustling. Then comes a final layer, powdered beeswax rubbed into the surface to quiet any squeak. You test it on the stone floor. Step, no sound. Step, still nothing. You hand it to Elias. He puts it on and walks across the room like a ghost. "Well?" you ask. He shrugs. "Could kill a man and not wake the dog." You beam. Garel claps like you've just performed a miracle. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval burglars, or nightmen as they were known, requested custom shoes with asymmetrical soles, meant to leave confusing footprints. Others asked for soles made of wrapped cloth, or even deer hide, prized for its near-silent texture. These were, strictly speaking, not guild approved. By midday, more commissions roll in, one for a librarian, my steps scare the mice, another for a night-watching monk. We're supposed to walk humbly, not clomp. Stealth cobbling, it seems, is in demand. You build a pair of sandals with felt lining and no buckles, opting for a leather wrap that tightens around the ankle without a sound. You test them on Gorell, who promptly tries to sneak up on Elias. It doesn't work. Elias hurls a spoon in his direction without looking. Later, while oiling a pair of soles, you find a note tucked into Willen's ledger. True silence isn't in the shoe, it's in the walker. The cobbler just gives them a chance. You pause, reread it, and smile. Historians still argue how widespread silent footwear really was. Some point to monastery rules requiring quiet movement, suggesting special shoes were common among monks. Others believe only a few elite professionals ever bothered. Either way, crafting for silence required not just skill, but a philosophy. That evening, Elias makes you walk a circuit around the shop in your finished pair. He has a spoon in one hand and a blindfold on. "If I hear you," he says, "I throw." You walk like a shadow. He doesn't throw. That'll do. Gorell tries the same challenge, but his right shoe squeaks. Elias throws. Gorell sulks. You end the night adding a page to your own notebook, a pattern for the ghost step shoe, your first true invention. You draw it carefully, label every part, then add a little message in the corner. To be used for good, or well-planned mischief. The workshop sleeps. The fire dims. You sit quietly, listening to the silence your shoes have earned. And for once, the quiet feels like applause. A knock rattles the workshop door before dawn. Not a polite knock, a tax collector knock. Elias answers with a grunt. A boy stands in the street, panting, holding a wax-sealed scroll and trying not to cry. "Guild messenger," he squeaks, "for Master Elias." Elias reads the scroll in silence, then hands it to you. Gorell reads over your shoulder. To the cobblers of Dunwich, you are summoned to submit one pair of shoes to the master's fair at Haymarket. Entry is mandatory. Judging shall be strict. Fines apply for poor craftsmanship. Guild of Leatherworkers, Chapter 9. Gorell blinks. A shoe contest? Elias sighs. A test. The Guild's way of making sure we haven't all gone soft. You're excited until you learn the rules. You must submit a single pair of shoes that proves mastery of design, stitch, fit, and finish. The judges will examine every inch, seams, soles, threading, even the polish. No second chances. Elias digs through Willen's ledger for inspiration. The trick, he mutters, is to build something impossible to ignore, but humble enough to say, "I still work for a living." He turns to you. You're making them. You nearly dropped the last you're holding. Me? You've got fingers and mistakes to make. Mainstream historical fact. Guild competitions were a real fixture of many trades in the Middle Ages, including cobbling. These events helped ensure standards, allowed masters to show off, and gave apprentices rare chances to prove their skill, sometimes earning the right to set up a shop of their own. You sketch 5 designs that night. One is too fancy, one too simple, one looks like a duck. Eventually, you settle on something strange and bold. A double-layered shoe, fine black calfskin over a hidden inner boot made of stitched lamb's wool and soft hide, joined by a spiral stitch that traces up and around the ankle like ivy. It's ambitious, maybe too ambitious. Elias doesn't smile, but he doesn't say no. You start with the inner shoe, shaping it to a last padded with wool to simulate warmth and form. The hide creaks, but obeys. The stitches are hidden inside, each one buried under a fold of the lamb's wool lining. Then comes the outer skin, rich calf, deep black, dyed with soot and vinegar. You cut it carefully, leaving a crescent-shaped reveal near the heel where the inner layer peeks out. Like the moon, Garel says dreamily. Like a mistake, Elias grumbles, but he watches closely. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval guilds allowed hidden maker's marks, tiny runes, initials, or symbols, stitched or carved inside the tongue or heel. These weren't for buyers. They were for pride, and sometimes protection. One London find had a Latin prayer hidden beneath the arch. You carve a tiny mark into the heel of your entry pair, a barely visible crescent with a line through it. Not a name, just a whisper. The final stitching takes hours. You loop the ivy stitch up the sides in 2 continuous spirals, tight and symmetrical. You burnish the leather with beeswax and soft cloth until it shines like obsidian. You even lace it with flat-cut silk cord, a rare indulgence Elias pulls from a drawer marked "For Miracles Only." Historians still argue whether Guild shows encouraged creativity or stifled it. Some claim they bred innovation, pushing craftspeople to experiment. Others argue the strict regulations narrowed imagination, forcing shoemakers into patterns meant only to impress other shoemakers. Both views might be true. The day of the fair arrives. Haymarket Square is a mess of tents, tools, food carts, and more leather than an ox funeral. Cobblers from every surrounding town gather, each bearing their finest work. Gilded boots, carved soles, slippers stitched so finely they seem poured. You feel small. Elias gives you the box. Don't let them shake you. They're just old men with clean hands. You place your shoes on the judging table. A crowd forms. One judge raises an eyebrow. Another squints. The master judge picks them up, turns them slowly, then peers into the heel. "Did you hide stitching under the spiral?" he mutters. You nod. He blinks. Ambitious. You spend the afternoon watching other apprentices fidget. One panics and spills wax. Another brags loudly, then cries when a judge ignores him. You just sit, breathing, waiting. When the judges reconvene, they whisper, nod, argue, whisper again. Then they announce 3 names. Yours is third. Elias nods. Garel hugs you so hard he almost dislocates something. You don't win gold, but you earn a master's commendation, a parchment that says you are no longer just an apprentice. You're a journeyman, a cobbler who can now work in any town with guild blessing. That night, back in the workshop, Elias hangs your parchment next to the hearth. Then he says softly, "You'll make better shoes than me one day." You stare at him. "Did you just compliment me?" He grunts. "You're not hearing things. Must be the wax fumes." You fall asleep with sore fingers and stained sleeves. But your heart wears a crown. A week after the fair, the rain sets in like a grudge. It isn't polite drizzle. It's the kind of cold, sideways spit that seeps into seams and soaks through to your bones. The kind of weather that turns shoemakers into doctors, because now every pair of boots that fails is a potential disaster. Wet feet mean rot. Rot means time off work. Time off work means empty bellies. And so the flood begins, not of water, but of customers, farmers with peeling soles, millers with cracked uppers, soldiers with boots that squelch when they walk. Elias hands you a stack of repair tags and says, "We don't sleep this week." You don't. You dive head first into the quiet art of shoe repair, an entire discipline unto itself. Fixing shoes is not the same as making them. You don't just replace. You adapt. You diagnose. You become half leather worker, half detective. A boy brings in a boot that sags to one side. You find the issue, the heel pegs worn down unevenly. You remove the heel, shave a wedge of fur, and reinstall it with angled brads. The next morning, he runs back in to say it's the first time he stood level in months. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval cobblers spent as much, if not more, time repairing footwear than making new pairs. A well-made shoe was expensive, and shoes were often passed down, restitched, resoled, and reinforced repeatedly. There were even cobblers who specialized solely in mending. You learn about invisible stitching, tucking thread inside the layers of leather so the repair can't be seen from the outside. You use bristle thread soaked in wax and crushed alder bark for strength. You discover the miracle of half soles, adding a new front without replacing the entire bottom. Garel invents something called the squish test, where he steps on shoes to guess which parts are failing. Elias bans it within 2 hours. A girl named Lisa brings in her mother's wedding shoes, soft red slippers warped and torn at the toe. You patch the silk underlay with a hidden square of lambskin and polish the rest until it shines again. Lisa cries. You pretend it's sawdust in your eye. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval cobblers would hide lucky charms or small amulets in repaired shoes, bits of bone, painted beads, even rolled prayers to protect the wearer. One surviving example had a tiny iron fish sewn into the lining, likely to ward off sickness. You start doing it too, quietly, just small things. A cross of thread here, a hidden knot there. Not because you believe in magic, but because it feels kind. Historians still argue whether the repair trade was fully respected within guild structures. Some say cobblers who only repaired were seen as lower tier than full shoemakers. Others argue repairmen held special status, especially in poorer towns where new shoes were rare. Either way, repair was constant and essential. One afternoon, a knight limps in, his boot trailing half a sole like a tongue. You brace for drama. Instead, he grins. Took a tumble chasing a goose. Not my proudest duel. You patch his sole, replace a bent heel plate, and line the inside with linen. He tests it, nods, and tosses you a silver coin. Never trust a goose, he mutters on his way out. By week's end, your hands are blistered and your stitching fingers ache. But you've repaired more shoes in 7 days than you made in your first 6 months. Some were delicate fixes, some were creative salvages, some were barely held together with prayer. But you did it. And then, just when the clouds break and the last puddles start to dry, Elias hands you a boot, one of yours, a very old one. Time to fix your own mistakes. You look at it. The seam along the toe is fraying, the heel's off-center, the arch padding's collapsed. You sigh. This was my 3rd pair, which means it's lasted longer than it deserved to. You get to work, carefully, patiently. You restitch the seam with neater hands. You rebalance the heel. You add a touch of extra padding at the arch. When it's done, you don't feel embarrassed anymore. You feel proud. That night, you write in your own ledger, shoes aren't immortal, but they remember. A repaired soul walks wiser. The fire crackles in the hearth. Your tools are finally still, and outside the town walks again, dry-footed, upright, grateful. It begins with bells, church bells, town bells, hand bells, ringing and clanging like someone's just married a duke to a dragon. Gorell bolts upright from a pile of leather scraps, blinking sleep from his face. Is it a fire? Elias chuckles. No, it's market day. And not just any market day, it's the Founders' Fair, the largest celebration the town sees all year. Tents spring up like mushrooms overnight. Jugglers, dancers, monks selling miracle soap. And smack in the middle of it all, a sprawling artisans' row for tradespeople to show off their finest work. This year, Elias rents a stall. You panic. I'm not ready. He raises an eyebrow. You're wearing shoes, aren't you? Then you're ready. You and Gorell haul the best of the workshop's wares into the square. Boots, slippers, sandals, even a pair of crimson heels Elias made for a noblewoman who never paid. You polish until your fingers go numb. Gorell insists on displaying the stealth shoes with a sign that reads, "Silent as sin." walk like a whisper. Elias doesn't stop him. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval fairs were not only centers of trade, but also showcases of craftsmanship. Cobblers, tailors, smiths, and potters all competed for attention. A good fair could land a craftsman enough commissions to last the entire year. By midday, the crowd thickens. People swarm the stalls, poking, lifting, sniffing. Why is everyone sniffing the shoes? Me, do you? And asking questions like, does this come in goat? Or, is this good for dancing after mead? A local bard commissions a pair of boots with hollow heels for smuggling coins. A traveling monk orders sandals that don't make my feet look like sin. A mother begs for slippers her child won't immediately eat. You begin to notice what sells best isn't flash, it's personality. A one-eyed sailor wants a left boot tougher than the right. I kick with it. A weaver wants shoes she can slip off quickly when the loom jams. A baker asks for soles that won't squeak on stone. Startling yeast is bad luck. You end up designing a pair of weaver clogs with side-laced flaps for fast removal and a flat toe edge for loom pushing. Garel sells 3 in an hour and renames them quick kickers. You grimace, but it sticks. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval fairs featured live cobbling demonstrations where shoemakers would build a shoe on the spot to show speed and skill. These often turned theatrical, with deliberate flourishes, audience interaction, and playful insults aimed at competitors. So, of course, Garel starts a live demo. He pulls in children, lets them try hammers, teaches a goat how to hold thread in its teeth, sort of. A crowd gathers. Elias just sighs and starts sketching new soul patterns with a charcoal stub. At one point, a merchant from another town visits the stall. He wears a long velvet coat, has a gold tooth, and smells faintly of honeyed dates. He picks up your spiral-stitched boot, the one from the guild contest, and turns it over in his hands. "Fine work," he says. "Where did you learn the looped arch pattern?" You blink. It just made sense. He nods. That's how it starts. Then slips a card into your hand. Rudin and Sons, bootmakers of Rosehold. "You ever tire of this town?" he says. "Look us up. We pay well. We teach better." He leaves before you can answer. Historians still argue how mobile medieval tradespeople really were. Some guilds restricted movement to protect local economies, while others encouraged travel for the sake of spreading innovation. Journeymen like you often took advantage of these gray areas to find work, skill, or adventure. By sunset, your stall is half empty, not from theft, just success. You watch families walk off with your work. A girl skips in red slippers. A monk hums in his new sandals. Even the bard hums a tune in rhythm with his new boot heels. Elias counts the coins, then hands you a pouch. "Your share." You stare. "This much?" You did the work. It feels heavier than gold. Later that night, you sit by the fire examining the merchant's card. You wonder what Rosehold is like, what their tools are like, whether they know the spiral stitch. Elias notices. You're thinking about leaving. You hesitate. Just wondering. He nods. That's what journeymen do. They wonder, then they walk. You both go quiet for a while. Then he says, if you go, take the weaver clog design, but not the goat. He stays. You laugh, and suddenly the town seems a little smaller. But the world feels wide. You don't leave, not yet. But the idea sits with you, like a coin in your pocket, cool and persistent. You catch yourself watching the road more often, listening to travelers swap stories at the inn, sketching strange shoe ideas in the corners of scrap parchment. Elias doesn't press. He just gives you more work. Today, he hands you a bundle and says, Pilgrim Commission, 3 pairs, leaving in 5 days. Pilgrims. That means shoes built for punishment, the kind that have to survive blistering roads, jagged hills, surprise downpours, and possibly divine intervention. You study the order. 1 man heading for Canterbury, 1 woman bound for Santiago, and 1 elderly friar off to visit 7 local shrines in memory of his lost dog. I don't judge, Elias mutters. They all walk the same road in the end. Mainstream historical fact. Pilgrimage was a massive part of medieval life. Whether for penance, devotion, or miracle-seeking, people walked hundreds of miles in shoes that had to last, or else be repaired constantly en route. Specialized cobblers catered to pilgrims, often designing shoes for brutal endurance over style. You start with the Canterbury man. He's young, lean, serious. You shape a pair of wide-toed boots with stiff heel counters, layered oxhide soles, and double stitching along the shank. You add a leather tongue that can be adjusted as his feet swell. Just enough comfort to survive, not enough to tempt stopping. Then comes the Santiago woman. She's older, but you can tell she walks every day. You give her heel supports made of ashwood slivers wrapped in felt. The leather's lighter, calf instead of ox, and you oil it until it gleams. You hide an extra patch of padding near the big toe. She'll thank you on day 10, Elias says. Finally, the friar. He arrives on a donkey that seems older than Elias. Walk, you ask? Not the whole way, the friar admits, but enough to matter. You build him something humble, low shoes with cork inserts, a crisscross lace over the arch, and at the last second, a tiny stitched paw print on the insole. He doesn't see it, but you know it's there. Here's a quirky tidbit. Many pilgrims placed relics in their shoes, small tokens, saintly scraps, even dried herbs from holy gardens. Some believed this protected them, others just liked the smell. One recorded pilgrim wore shoes lined with rose petals soaked in wine. You slip a dried lavender sprig into the tongue of the Santiago pear, just because. As the pilgrims leave, one by one, you feel a strange pull. They're not nobles, not merchants, just people chasing something bigger than themselves. And you, quietly, get to send them walking. Elias watches you watching them. Still thinking of Rosehold? Sometimes. He nods. Then let's make sure you're ready. He clears the workbench and lays out something strange, a half-finished pair of shoes, old but elegant. The stitching's incomplete, the leather black and blood-brown, worn smooth with years. My journeyman test, he mutters. I never finished them. You blink. Why? Too proud, too scared. Didn't want to see it done wrong. Didn't want to see it done right. He slides them toward you. Finish them. The challenge rattles you. These are his shoes, his stitching, his legacy. You spend the next 2 days measuring, matching, mimicking. You study the groove depth of his awl marks, the subtle taper in his toe box shaping. You replicate his angled stitch spacing by holding your breath. Then, when you're certain, you add one thing of your own. A seam hidden under the arch, reinforced, stronger than necessary. A signature, not bold, not flashy, just yours. Historians still argue whether cobblers treated shoes as art or utility, but sometimes a pair of shoes becomes both. When design and function meet with care, they become something more, a way of marking time and skill and soul. When you show Elias the finished pair, he runs his hand along the sole, doesn't say a word, then places them in a wooden box lined with cloth and tucks it under the workbench. You don't ask why. You don't need to. That night, as Geralt snores and rain taps the shutters, you lie awake sketching in your book. Designs from other lands, materials you haven't used, ideas you barely understand yet, and at the bottom of the page you write, soon, because something in you knows the road is coming, not as a question anymore, but as a step. The letter comes at dawn, hand-delivered, sealed in red wax, and tied with a scrap of dyed ribbon, the kind that only comes from courts, not corners. Elias opens it with his usual grimace, scans the page, and then, without a word, passes it to you. The royal household is requesting a master shoemaker, not just for any job, but for the coronation of the young prince, now come of age and about to inherit his late father's crown. The shoes must be ceremonial, regal, perfect, and made within 2 weeks. You feel your breath catch. They want you, Elias says, but I told them I'd send someone better. You? He shakes his head. You. The shop goes quiet. Then Gorell drops a spool of thread and shouts, "Well, it's about time." Elias sets out the bench, dusts off the finest tools, and brings down a roll of Cordovan leather, deep burgundy, polished smooth, hide like velvet steel, only used once before. This, he says, is the final test. Mainstream historical fact. royal coronation shoes were deeply symbolic. The English coronation shoe, for example, often bore religious motifs, national emblems, or family crests. Some were never worn again, just displayed or buried with the monarch. Others were passed down as heirlooms. You sketch for hours. The prince is young, only 17. His foot is narrow, not yet hardened by war or winter. You measure twice, 3 times. You shape the last from alder wood. You cut the upper from the burgundy hide with care that feels almost holy. Then you pause. This isn't just a shoe, it's a message. You shape the arch to lift posture. You edge the sole with a carved braid, symbolizing continuity. You add a single gold thread stitched through the heel, not visible unless the light catches it right. Garrel suggests putting bells inside. You threaten to stitch him to the wall. The final pattern is sleek, formal, and balanced. The toe box curves subtly upward, a nod to tradition, but with just enough flattening to suggest restraint. You line the inside with lambskin soft as sleep and pad the heel with triple wool layers. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval coronation shoes were designed not to be walked in, only worn while seated on the throne. The idea was that a king does not walk among the people. Other traditions insisted the king walk barefoot on holy ground, so his shoes were made easy to remove. But this prince, he's a marcher, a reformer. They say he walks the walls at night just to test the guards. So you build him shoes he can actually move in. As you stitch, Elias works beside you, not correcting, not hovering, just matching your pace. For the first time, you're equals on the bench. Put a mistake in the stitching, he murmurs. You blink. What? Small one, hidden, a reminder no work is perfect, keeps the shoe and the man humble. You do it, one thread slightly longer than the others, buried under the inner tongue. The shoes are finished with a whisper of beeswax and a final breath for luck. You wrap them in linen, place them in a cedar box, and send them off with a scribe on horseback. Then you wait. 2 days later, the reply comes, a second letter, handwritten in tight cursive. The prince wishes to meet the maker. You read it 3 times. Elias claps you on the back. Wear clean boots. The palace is bigger than you imagined. Stone halls echo your footsteps. Everything smells of parchment, polish, and candle smoke. A steward leads you to a chamber lined with windows and books. The prince is already wearing the shoes. He's walking, no, pacing, with an energy that suggests he hasn't sat down in days. They don't squeak, he says without looking up. You nod. They breathe. They fit. They don't look like someone tried too hard to impress me. You smile. He turns to face you. Are you the one who stitched the mistake? Yes. He nods once. Good. Only liars make perfect things. He offers his hand. You shake it. Historians still argue how involved royalty was in their own regalia. Some claim kings never knew the names of their cobblers. Others cite stories of monarchs rewarding a shoemaker with gold, land, or lifelong commissions. In truth, the best cobblers left behind no fame, only footprints. When you return to the shop, Elias has cleared your bench. "You're leaving soon," he says. "I haven't decided. You have." He gives you a bundle, your tools, your ledger, a pair of boots you never made, but clearly meant for your feet. Inside the soul is a stitched message. Step well, return wiser. That night you pack. Gorell tears up. Elias pretends not to. As you close the door behind you, the road opens like a story. Not a farewell, a beginning. The road stretches out, soft with morning mist. Every step lands gently, wrapped in the shoes you made yourself. Your stitch, your rhythm, your pace. Behind you, the shop settles into memory. The smell of tanned leather and beeswax fades into birdsong. Elias's voice becomes a quiet echo. Garrel's laughter folds into wind. Your feet move without effort. The boots hug each step, forgiving every pebble. You pass fields still glistening with dew, a sleepy ox watching from under an elm. Somewhere, a blackbird sings a note that feels like home and forward all at once. Ahead, the next town waits. Maybe they need shoes, maybe they need a story, maybe they just need someone who knows how to listen to feet. You walk slower now, not tired, just aware of the breeze, of the sun warming your back, of the way the world feels when you stop trying to outrun it. The leather creaks with familiarity. You flex your toes. Everything fits. No coronation shoes here, no guild judges, just the quiet beat of your soles on dirt and stone and grass. The world doesn't need to know your name, but it will remember your work. So rest easy now. Close your eyes. Let the fire crackle. Let the fan hum. And if you dream, may your dream walk softly like a well-made shoe.